Very good evening and welcome to the India Development Debate. I'm Tamanna Indamder. Today on the show, we look at a very important story which may have missed your notice. About 90 pilots from SpiceJet who are trained to fly the 737 MAX have been derostered by the DGCA. The reason is that the DGCA believes that they were trained improperly. Remember, the 737 was banned for quite a few months, almost 27 months after an accident that took place in 2019. And one of the conditions for allowing it to fly again was a certain protocol of training that the pilots received. Today on the show, we're going to figure out what exactly happened. If these pilots were not properly trained, how were they flying and what does that mean for passenger safety? In a major move, the Aviation Authority has barred 90 SpiceJet pilots from flying the Boeing 737 MAX till they undergo proper training. The measure comes after the authority found issues in the simulator training that the pilots underwent at a facility in Noida. To speak more on this, I'm joined now by Mark T. Martin, founder and CEO of Martin Consulting. Mark, great to have you on the show. Thank you so much for speaking with us. Just, try and explain to us first how, significant this move by the DGCA is. Because what does this mean? Were these 90 pilots not fit to fly all of this time?
Good evening, and thanks for having me on ET-Now. I think what's really important here is to understand the level of risk we're dealing with. The 737 MAX were made familiar with the MCAS as well as dealing with what you call a runaway stab crib. Okay, so it was a standard operating procedure, and it was mandatory for all airlines across the world, including SpiceJet, to bring that training if you wanted to bring the 737 MAX into revenue service. I think outstanding oversight and brilliant surveillance by the Indian DGCA, possibly for the first time, that they've actually picked this up and they've raised it to the point that they've grounded these pilots. The bigger concern I have here, Tamanna, is centered on the kind of risk exposure we've seen as a result of these pilots not being trained on the MAX with the new procedures of the new SOP. How many flights have they done? And if they were rostered, how many passengers did they put at risk whilst flying untrained? These are questions that the DGCA now needs to get up and ask SpiceJet. And in my view, a full-blown investigation should be conducted because we cannot afford to have any incident with any aircraft. Let's not forget, India has had a 737-800 incident in Kozhikode, the Air India Express crash. Most recently, we're dealing with China and China Eastern. And a lot of what's being spoken about in the safety community is that China Eastern could also be very similar to what happened with Lion Air as well as Ethiopian Airlines. Not verified, but it is a concern and by the DGCA.
So, Mark, as I understand it, this particular simulation training facility in Noida, which is under the scanner, has been outsourced, right? It's an independent contractor which undertakes these pilot trainings. And is that where one of the loopholes is? Who are these contractors?
I think the bigger issue here is the airline is responsible for all training that is imparted in outsourced, insourced, or foreign simulation facilities. The airline decides the curriculum. The airline decides what the crew has to be trained on. So what's happened clearly is that the airline has not got these pilots to do that training. So the responsibility lies with the airline. The simulator facility in Noida, whether it's CAE or the same facility in Bangalore, they're just simulators. The instructors usually go from the airline and you just pay for the simulator, the time on the simulator. But what's trained to the pilot or during the simulator session is what the airline decides. So everything comes back, all roads lead back to the airline. The airline should have made sure that the pilots were trained with the right and the new syllabus. And to be honest and to be fair on SpiceJet, they were bringing back the 737 Maxes from long-term storage. They were very eager to get it back post the second wave lockdown, right? So, this lapse is way too big to be ignored. And I think as the traveling public, you, me, millions of Indians out there, we demand to know everything about the safety of aircraft, the training of pilots, and the maintenance airworthiness of the aircraft itself. And I think at this stage, it becomes very important that we do not allow even for a minute any risk exposure with the 737 MAX in India. So great job by the DGCA. I think this is possibly the first ever step that they've taken a proactive initiative. And I think we need to be more proactive in the months to come.
So, Mark, once again, to the basic questions and the viewers who are watching, to the untrained eye, it may seem like a bit of bureaucracy. What exactly were these lapses? It's not as if these pilots did not know how to fly the aircraft. So can you give us a clearer sense of what the risks would have been in this case? If you did have 90 pilots potentially flying civilian passengers, what would they have been seen as a risk?
Now, when you go into a simulator session, Tamanna, what you're trained to deal with is emergency procedures. The 737 MAX and the new training syllabus was to deal with the MCAS, the little unit that corrects the aircraft pitch on takeoff. The same issue and reason what led to Lion Air and Ethiopian Airlines, both the aircraft crash. So a special training syllabus and a training plan was devised so that pilots were trained to deal in that kind of an emergency and to be aware of what to expect and how to respond to that sort of an emergency and action. Okay. Now, if that pilot and the co-pilot were not trained to deal with that emergency, and God forbid, if a runaway stabilizer trim or a stab trim or an MCAS related glitch kicked in, there would be no recovery, sadly, for that aircraft. Okay, and trainings and simulator sessions are designed to ensure safety is not compromised ever during flight and on ground. And I think now, again, I don't want to speculate. It's not fair. Let the DGCA investigate this. We're not sure if those pilots who were not trained, whether they were actually rostered on commercial flights or not.
Exactly. These are details that we need.
Let's hope they were not. At least we know. Yes, these are details we need, yes.
Absolutely. We'll wait for that investigation. But Mark, thank you so much for joining us today and just giving us perspective of how serious this lapse could have been. This is one thing which we can tolerate just no compromise on. Thank you once.
Pleasure. Thanks for having me.